In a small, quiet suburban neighborhood, life moved at a predictable pace. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed lawns, and the air carried the faint scent of blooming flowers during springtime. It was the kind of place where people waved to their neighbors as they passed by, and children played on the sidewalks until the streetlights flickered on. For Mr. James Johnson, an elderly African-American man in his late 70s, this was home. He had lived in the same house for over 40 years, raising a family and building a reputation as a respected figure in the community. Retired from his career as a high school history teacher, Mr. Johnson spent most of his days tending to his garden or taking long evening walks around the block, a routine that brought him peace after decades of hard work. On one such evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, Mr. Johnson set out for his usual stroll. Dressed in a light jacket and comfortable shoes, he walked slowly but steadily, his cane tapping softly against the pavement. His mind wandered to pleasant memories, his wife's laughter, his grandchildren running through the backyard, and the countless students whose lives he had touched over the years. He nodded politely to a young couple walking their dog and exchanged warm smiles with a neighbor watering her plants. Everything seemed normal, just another peaceful night in a neighborhood he loved dearly. But as Mr. Johnson approached the corner convenience store, the tranquility of the evening shattered abruptly. A police car pulled up beside him, its tires screeching slightly as it came to a halt. Two officers stepped out, their expressions stern and unwelcoming. One of them, a tall man with a buzz cut, immediately barked, "Hey you, stop right there." Startled, Mr. Johnson froze mid-step, gripping his cane tightly. "Is something wrong, officer?" he asked, his voice calm but tinged with confusion. The second officer, shorter and stockier, circled around him, scrutinizing him as if he were a suspect caught red-handed. "What are you doing out here?" the first officer demanded, ignoring Mr. Johnson's question entirely. Mr. Johnson tried to explain himself, speaking slowly and deliberately so there would be no misunderstanding. "I'm just taking my evening walk," he said. "I live 2 blocks down." But his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Instead of listening, the officers exchanged skeptical glances, their body language radiating suspicion. "Do you know anything about the vandalism reported earlier tonight?" the taller officer asked, his tone accusatory. Mr. Johnson shook his head firmly. "No, sir. I haven't heard anything about that." Yet the officers didn't seem satisfied. Without offering further explanation, they ordered him to turn around and place his hands behind his back. Too shocked to resist, Mr. Johnson complied, his heart pounding in his chest. Within moments, cold metal handcuffs clicked into place around his wrists. As the officers led him toward the patrol car, Mr. Johnson felt a wave of humiliation wash over him. He glanced around, noticing a few curious onlookers who had gathered nearby. Some looked concerned, others simply stared, unsure of what was happening. "This is a mistake," Mr. Johnson muttered under his breath, hoping someone might hear him and speak up. But no one did. The officers opened the rear door of the squad car and pushed him inside, slamming it shut behind him. Sitting in the cramped back seat, Mr. Johnson struggled to make sense of the situation. He had done nothing wrong. Why were they treating him like a criminal? The ride to the station was silent, except for the occasional crackle of the police radio. Mr. Johnson stared out the window, watching familiar streets blur past. Memories flooded his mind. Memories of growing up in a time when racial prejudice was far more overt than it was today. He thought about the civil rights movement, the marches, the speeches, and the sacrifices made by so many to ensure equality for future generations. And yet here he was, decades later, still facing the same kind of baseless suspicion and hostility. Tears welled up in his eyes, not from fear, but from frustration. How could this happen in a world that claimed to have progressed at the station? Things only grew worse. The officers refused to answer his questions, instead leaving him seated in a dimly lit holding area while they filled out paperwork. Time dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity. Mr. Johnson's thoughts drifted to his family. What would they think when they found out he had been detained? Would they worry? Would they believe him when he told them he hadn't done anything wrong? Just as despair began to creep in, a commotion outside caught his attention. Voices rose in argument and footsteps echoed down the hallway. Moments later, a commanding presence entered the room. A woman wearing a crisp uniform and a determined expression. It was Police Chief Margaret Hayes, and everything was about to change. Margaret Hayes was known throughout the department for her integrity and dedication to justice. She had risen through the ranks not because of favoritism, but because of her relentless pursuit of fairness and accountability. When reports of Mr. Johnson's detention reached her desk, she wasted no time reviewing the incident. Something about it didn't sit right with her. The lack of evidence, the aggressive tone used by the officers, it all pointed to something deeper, something systemic. Determined to get answers, she drove to the station herself, ready to confront the truth head-on. When Chief Hayes walked into the holding area and saw Mr. Johnson sitting there, her heart sank. Here was an elderly man, frail and visibly shaken, treated as though he were a danger to society. Without hesitation, she approached him, introducing herself and apologizing for the ordeal he had endured. Her voice was steady but filled with genuine remorse. "Mr. Johnson, I am so sorry this happened to you," she said, unlocking the handcuffs and helping him stand. For the first time since the ordeal began, Mr. Johnson felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps not everyone in power was blind to injustice after all. Outside the station, the crowd that had gathered continued to grow. People whispered among themselves, some expressing outrage, others offering support to Mr. Johnson. Someone handed him a cup of water while another placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment Chief Hayes stood beside him, vowing to hold those responsible accountable. In that instant, Mr. Johnson realized that his experience, though painful, had the potential to spark meaningful change. As he looked around at the faces of his neighbors, he knew he wasn't alone. Together, they could fight for a better, fairer world, one step at a time. As the patrol car carrying Mr. Johnson pulled away from the convenience store, a small crowd began to gather at the scene. Neighbors who had been walking their dogs or chatting on their porches stopped what they were doing to watch the unfolding drama. Some recognized Mr. Johnson immediately, the kind elderly man who always greeted them warmly during his evening walks. Others didn't know him personally, but were alarmed by the sight of an older gentleman being led away in handcuffs. Whispers rippled through the group as people tried to piece together what was happening. "Why are they arresting him?" one woman asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "He's just an old man," another added, shaking their head. Among the onlookers was Sarah Collins, a young mother pushing her toddler in a stroller. She had seen Mr. Johnson countless times before, always dressed neatly and walking with a quiet dignity that commanded respect. When she noticed the police car driving off, she felt a knot form in her stomach. Something about the situation didn't feel right. Pulling out her phone, Sarah began recording the scene, capturing the officer's aggressive demeanor and the shocked expressions of those around her. Within minutes, others followed suit, holding up their phones to document the incident. The footage quickly spread across social media, drawing attention not only from locals but also from people in neighboring towns. Comments poured in, ranging from outrage to calls for justice. "This is unacceptable," one user wrote. "What did he do wrong?" another demanded. The hashtag #JusticeFor Mr. Johnson began trending almost instantly. Back at the police station, news of the detention reached Police Chief Margaret Hayes within an hour. Sitting in her office, she was reviewing reports when a junior officer knocked on her door. "Chief, we've got a situation," he said hesitantly, handing her a file. Inside were details of the arrest, or rather the lack thereof. There was no evidence linking Mr. Johnson to any crime. No witness statements placing him at the scene of the alleged vandalism. All that existed was a vague report filed earlier in the day about graffiti on a nearby wall. Yet two of her officers had detained an elderly man based solely on suspicion, without following proper protocol. Chief Hayes frowned deeply as she read through the sparse information. Her instincts told her this wasn't just a simple misunderstanding, it was something far more troubling. Determined to get to the bottom of things, Chief Hayes reviewed the body camera footage from the arresting officers. What she saw made her blood boil. From the moment they approached Mr. Johnson, their tone was accusatory and dismissive. They barely gave him a chance to explain himself before cuffing him and shoving him into the car. At one point, one of the officers muttered under his breath, "We don't need troublemakers like you around here." The comment sent chills down Chief Hayes' spine. It wasn't just poor judgment, it was outright prejudice masquerading as law enforcement. She paused the video, leaning back in her chair and rubbing her temples. This wasn't the first time she'd encountered racism within the ranks, but it never failed to enrage her. Every citizen deserved to be treated with fairness and respect, regardless of their race or background. Without wasting another second, Chief Hayes grabbed her coat and headed straight to the holding area where Mr. Johnson was being kept. As she strode through the station, her presence commanded attention. Officers stopped mid-conversation, watching as she moved with purpose. When she arrived at the holding cell, she found Mr. Johnson sitting quietly on a bench, his hands clasped tightly around his cane. His eyes were downcast and his shoulders slumped, a stark contrast to the proud, upright posture she imagined he usually carried. Taking a deep breath, Chief Hayes opened the door and stepped inside. "Mr. Johnson," she said softly, her voice filled with sincerity. "I'm Police Chief Margaret Hayes. I want to apologize for what you've been through tonight." At the sound of her voice, Mr. Johnson looked up, his expression a mixture of surprise and exhaustion. For a moment he simply stared at her, unsure of what to say. Then slowly he nodded. "Thank you," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Chief Hayes knelt beside him, ensuring she maintained eye contact. "Sir, I assure you this isn't how we operate. We're going to fix this, and we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again." Her words carried weight, not just because of her rank, but because of the genuine concern etched on her face. She helped him stand, unlocking the handcuffs still dangling loosely from his wrists. As the metal clinked to the floor, Mr. Johnson let out a shaky sigh, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. Meanwhile, outside the station, the crowd continued to grow. Word had spread quickly, thanks in part to the videos and posts shared online. Dozens of residents now stood on the sidewalk, some holding signs that read, "End racial profiling," and "Justice for all." A local news crew arrived, setting up cameras and microphones to capture the unfolding events. Reporters approached members of the crowd asking for their thoughts. One man, a middle-aged father named Robert, spoke passionately into the microphone. "I've lived here my whole life and I've never seen anything like this. Mr. Johnson is a good man. How could they treat him this way?" His words resonated with many, drawing nods of agreement from those around him. Even passers-by who hadn't initially planned to stay found themselves drawn into the moment, unable to ignore the raw emotion in the air. Inside the station, Chief Hayes wasted no time addressing the officers involved in the arrest. She summoned them to her office, her expression unreadable but her demeanor authoritative. "Explain yourselves," she ordered, gesturing toward the chairs in front of her desk. The two men shifted uncomfortably, exchanging nervous glances. The taller officer, whose name tag read Officer Daniels, cleared his throat. "Chief, we received a call about vandalism in the area. When we saw Mr. Johnson near the convenience store, we thought he might be connected." His explanation trailed off lamely, lacking conviction even to his own ears. Chief Hayes raised an eyebrow. "And did you find any evidence to support that assumption?" she asked sharply. The officers exchanged another glance, their silence speaking volumes. Frustrated but composed, Chief Hayes leaned forward, resting her elbows on her desk. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice firm but controlled. "You detained an elderly man without probable cause, subjected him to unnecessary humiliation, and violated our core principles of fairness and integrity. This isn't just a mistake, it's misconduct." The weight of her words hung heavy in the room. Officer Daniels opened his mouth to protest, but Chief Hayes cut him off. "I'll decide what happens next. But rest assured, there will be consequences." With that, she dismissed them, leaving the two men pale and visibly shaken. Returning to the main area of the station, Chief Hayes sought out Mr. Johnson once again. By now, the crowd outside had grown restless, chanting slogans and demanding answers. Chief Hayes stepped outside, flanked by a few senior officers, to address the gathering. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, raising her hands to quiet the murmurs. "I understand your anger, and I share it. What happened to Mr. Johnson tonight is unacceptable, and I promise you that action will be taken. Our department exists to serve and protect everyone equally, and we will hold ourselves accountable to that standard." Her speech earned applause from the crowd, though some remained skeptical, calling for concrete measures rather than empty promises. Later that evening, as the crowd began to disperse, Chief Hayes accompanied Mr. Johnson back to his home. Along the way, she listened intently as he recounted his experience, his voice steady despite the pain evident in his words. "I've lived here for decades," he said, shaking his head. "I thought I was safe here. I thought things had changed." Chief Hayes placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Things are changing, Mr. Johnson, and tonight you reminded us all why that change matters." When they finally reached his house, Mr. Johnson thanked her once more, his gratitude palpable. As she watched him step inside and close the door, behind him, Chief Hayes knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but she was ready to lead the charge, for Mr. Johnson, for the community, and for justice itself. The next morning, the story of Mr. Johnson's detention had spread far beyond the confines of the quiet suburban neighborhood. Local newspapers ran front-page headlines like, "Elderly Man Detained by Police Without Cause," and "Chief Hayes Steps in to Address Racial Profiling Incident." Social media platforms were flooded with reactions, from heartfelt messages of support for Mr. Johnson to scathing criticisms of the officers involved. The hashtag, #JusticeForMr. for Mr. Johnson, continued to trend, drawing attention not only from residents but also from civil rights organizations and activists across the country. People shared stories of their own experiences with racial profiling, turning the incident into a broader conversation about systemic racism within law enforcement. At the police station, Chief Margaret Hayes arrived early, determined to address the growing concerns head-on. She called an emergency meeting with all staff members, from patrol officers to administrative personnel, making it clear that this was not just another routine briefing. The atmosphere in the room was tense as everyone filed in, some whispering nervously while others avoided eye contact altogether. When Chief Hayes entered, her presence commanded immediate silence. Standing at the front of the room, she began by acknowledging the gravity of the situation. "What happened last night is unacceptable," she said, her voice firm yet measured. "It's not just about one man. It's about how we treat every single person who interacts with this department." She went on to explain the details of the incident, playing snippets of the body camera footage for everyone to see. The footage showed the officer's aggressive behavior and dismissive attitude toward Mr. Johnson, leaving no room for ambiguity. As the video played, there were audible gasps and murmurs throughout the room. Some officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others looked down, unable to meet the chief's gaze. When the clip ended, Chief Hayes turned off the screen and faced her team directly. "This isn't just a failure of judgment, it's a failure of character," she said. "We swore an oath to protect and serve, not to discriminate or intimidate. And when we lose sight of that, we betray the trust of the very people we're supposed to safeguard." Determined to drive her point home, Chief Hayes announced a series of reforms aimed at addressing the root causes of such incidents. First, she mandated comprehensive training programs focused on cultural sensitivity and de-escalation techniques. These sessions would be mandatory for every member of the department, regardless of rank or tenure. "Understanding someone's perspective doesn't make you weak, it makes you effective," she emphasized. Second, she introduced stricter guidelines for stops and detentions, requiring officers to provide detailed justification for any action taken against a civilian. This policy change was designed to eliminate vague assumptions and ensure accountability at every level. Finally, she established a citizen oversight committee, a group of community members who would review complaints against officers and offer recommendations for improvement. While these measures were met with cautious optimism by some, they sparked resistance from others. A handful of veteran officers grumbled under their breath, accusing Chief Hayes of being too harsh or overly political. One officer in particular muttered loudly enough for others to hear, "She's letting public pressure dictate our work." But Chief Hayes wasn't swayed. She knew that meaningful change often came with pushback, especially in institutions resistant to reform. Addressing the dissenters directly, she said, "If your priority is protecting your ego instead of serving the public, then maybe this isn't the right place for you. I won't tolerate prejudice. Not here, not ever." As news of the proposed changes spread, the community responded with cautious hope. Many appreciated Chief Hayes' transparency and willingness to take responsibility. However, some remained skeptical, wondering if the reforms would truly translate into long-term improvements or simply amount to empty promises. To demonstrate her commitment, Chief Hayes organized a town hall meeting later that week, inviting residents to voice their concerns and suggestions. The event was held in the auditorium of the local high school, where Mr. Johnson had once taught history. Dozens of people attended, filling the rows of chairs and spilling into the aisles. When Chief Hayes took the stage, she was greeted with a mix of applause and wary silence. She opened the floor for comments, encouraging attendees to speak freely. One woman stood up, clutching a microphone tightly. "I've lived in this town my whole life," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "And I'm scared. For my son, for my neighbors, for myself. How can we trust the police when things like this keep happening?" Her words struck a chord, prompting nods of agreement from others in the audience. Another man spoke next, sharing his own experience of being pulled over multiple times for no apparent reason other than the color of his skin. Each story added weight to the discussion, underscoring the deep-seated mistrust many felt toward law enforcement. Throughout the meeting, Chief Hayes listened intently, taking notes and occasionally nodding in acknowledgement. When it was her turn to respond, she didn't shy away from the uncomfortable truths laid bare by the speakers. "You're right to feel frustrated," she admitted. "Trust is earned, not given. And we have a lot of work to do to rebuild what's been broken. But I want you to know that I'm committed to making this department better, not just for today, but for the future." She outlined specific steps she planned to take, including regular updates on the progress of the reforms and opportunities for ongoing dialogue between the police and the community. By the end of the meeting, there was a sense of cautious optimism in the air. While skepticism lingered, many left feeling heard and hopeful that real change might finally be possible. Meanwhile, Mr. Johnson found himself thrust into the spotlight in ways he never anticipated. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers reached out to express their support, offering kind words and gestures of solidarity. Some brought him meals, while others sent letters thanking him for inspiring courage and resilience. Despite the overwhelming warmth, Mr. Johnson struggled to process everything that had happened. He spent hours sitting on his porch, staring out at the street where his peaceful evening walk had turned into a nightmare. His mind replayed the events over and over. The harsh voices of the officers, the cold bite of the handcuffs, the humiliation of being treated like a criminal. Yet amidst the pain, he also felt a flicker of purpose. If his experience could shine a light on injustice and spark meaningful change, then perhaps it hadn't been entirely in vain. To cope with the emotional toll, Mr. Johnson leaned on his family. His daughter Lisa visited him frequently, bringing her children along to lift his spirits. They laughed together, sharing memories of happier times, and reminded him of the love and respect he had earned over the years. Lisa also encouraged him to channel his emotions into action. "Dad, you've always taught us to stand up for what's right," she said one evening. "Why stop now? You could help make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Her words resonated deeply with Mr. Johnson, planting the seed of an idea that would soon take root. In the days that followed, Mr. Johnson began attending meetings organized by local advocacy groups. At first he hesitated, unsure of how much he could contribute. But as he listened to others share their stories and brainstorm solutions, He realized he had a unique role to play. As a lifelong educator, he understood the power of knowledge and communication. Drawing on his teaching experience, he volunteered to lead workshops aimed at fostering understanding between law enforcement and marginalized communities. His calm demeanor and ability to connect with people made him a natural leader, and soon he became a key figure in the movement for justice. Back at the police station, Chief Hayes kept her promise to hold the officers accountable. After conducting a thorough internal investigation, she suspended Officer Daniels and his partner without pay, citing their blatant disregard for protocol and discriminatory behavior. The decision sent shockwaves through the department, sending a clear message that misconduct would not be tolerated. While some colleagues defended the officers, arguing that they were simply doing their jobs, most recognized the necessity of holding them accountable. Chief Hayes also implemented monthly reviews of all arrests and detentions, ensuring that similar incidents wouldn't slip through the cracks unnoticed. By the end of the week, the ripple effects of the incident were undeniable. Conversations about racial profiling and police accountability dominated dinner tables, classrooms, and workplaces. Schools incorporated discussions about systemic racism into their curricula, inspired by the bravery of individuals like Mr. Johnson and Chief Hayes. Even neighboring towns took notice, reaching out to learn more about the reforms being implemented in the suburb. What had started as a single act of injustice had blossomed into a catalyst for change, proving that even in the darkest moments, there is always potential for growth, if people are willing to listen, learn, and act. The weeks following the incident brought a whirlwind of activity to the small suburban town. Chief Margaret Hayes's bold actions and Mr. Johnson's quiet resilience had ignited a firestorm of discussion, debate, and determination that stretched far beyond their neighborhood. The reforms announced by Chief Hayes were no longer just internal policies. They became a blueprint for other departments grappling with similar issues. News outlets from across the state began covering the story, interviewing residents, activists, and even Chief Hayes herself. Her calm yet unwavering stance resonated deeply with audiences, earning her praise as a leader willing to confront uncomfortable truths head-on. One evening, during an interview on a local news program, Chief Hayes sat in a studio chair, her uniform pressed and her badge gleaming under the bright lights. The anchor asked her directly, "What do you say to critics who claim your reforms are too drastic or politically motivated?" Without hesitation, Chief Hayes leaned forward slightly, her expression resolute. "I say this, my job isn't about politics, it's about justice. If taking drastic steps is what it takes to ensure every person feels safe and respected in their community, then so be it. We can't afford to wait any longer." Her words echoed across living rooms and social media feeds, sparking admiration from many but also drawing criticism from those resistant to change. Yet Chief Hayes remained steadfast, knowing that progress often came at the cost of comfort. Meanwhile, Mr. James Johnson continued to play an increasingly prominent role in advocating for reform. Encouraged by his family and friends, he agreed to speak at a statewide conference on racial equity and policing. The event was held in a large auditorium filled with hundreds of attendees, including law enforcement officials, community leaders, and activists. When Mr. Johnson stepped onto the stage leaning lightly on his cane, the room fell silent. He looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, others unknown, and took a deep breath. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "I never imagined I'd stand here today, not because I lack courage, but because I never thought my story would matter. But here we are." He recounted the events of that fateful night, describing how two officers approached him without cause, accused him of crimes he hadn't committed, and treated him as though his presence alone was suspicious. His tone was measured, neither accusatory nor bitter, but the raw emotion behind his words struck a chord with everyone in the room. "It wasn't just the handcuffs that hurt," he continued. "It was the realization that, after all these years, some people still see me not as a human being, but as a stereotype." There were murmurs of agreement from the audience, and several people wiped away tears. Mr. Johnson went on to emphasize the importance of education and empathy in bridging divides between communities and law enforcement. We must teach our children and ourselves to look beyond fear and assumptions, he said. Fear blinds us. It turns neighbors into strangers and differences into threats. But if we choose empathy instead, we can build bridges where walls once stood. As he concluded his speech, the crowd erupted into applause, rising to their feet in a standing ovation. For Mr. Johnson, it was both humbling and empowering, a reminder that his voice mattered and that sharing his pain could inspire others to act. Back in the neighborhood, the impact of the incident continued to ripple outward. Inspired by Mr. Johnson's courage, local schools invited him to speak to students about resilience, equality, and the importance of standing up against injustice. Teachers incorporated lessons on civil rights history into their curricula, using current events like Mr. Johnson's detention as real-world examples of systemic racism. One high school senior named Marcus, who attended one of Mr. Johnson's talks, later wrote an essay about the experience. Hearing Mr. Johnson's story made me realize that racism isn't just something from the past. It's alive today, and it affects people I know, Marcus wrote. But it also showed me that one person can make a difference if they refuse to stay silent. In addition to speaking engagements, Mr. Johnson joined forces with advocacy groups to organize community workshops aimed at fostering dialogue between residents and police officers. These sessions brought together unlikely participants, officers who might have previously dismissed calls for reform, and citizens who harbored deep mistrust of law enforcement. At one such workshop, Officer Ramirez, a young patrolman new to the department, found himself seated across from a group of skeptical community members. The tension in the room was palpable until Mr. Johnson spoke up. "Let's start by listening to each other," he suggested gently. Not to argue, but to understand. His calming presence helped ease the initial awkwardness, paving the way for honest conversations about fears, frustrations, and hopes for the future. Chief Hayes supported these efforts wholeheartedly, attending many of the workshops herself. She encouraged her officers to participate openly, reminding them that vulnerability was a strength, not a weakness. During one session, she addressed the group, saying, "Change starts with accountability. If we're going to rebuild trust, we need to admit when we've fallen short and work together to do better." Her willingness to acknowledge flaws within the system earned her respect from both sides of the table, creating a foundation for collaboration rather than confrontation. As momentum grew, neighboring towns began reaching out to learn more about the initiatives underway in the suburb. Delegations of mayors, police chiefs, and community leaders visited the area, eager to replicate its successes. Chief Hayes welcomed them warmly, sharing detailed reports and offering guidance based on her department's experiences. "This isn't about competition. It's about cooperation," she told one visiting chief. "If we can create safer, fairer communities together, then everyone wins." Her collaborative approach fostered partnerships that extended far beyond county lines, proving that meaningful change was possible when people worked toward a common goal. Despite the progress, challenges remained. Not everyone embraced the reforms enthusiastically. Some officers grumbled about the additional training requirements, viewing them as unnecessary burdens. A few vocal critics argued that Chief Hayes's policies prioritized public relations over practicality, accusing her of pandering to political correctness. Even within the community, there were dissenting voices. One longtime resident, a retired firefighter named Tom, expressed frustration at a town hall meeting. "I don't deny there's a problem," he admitted. "But I worry we're focusing too much on punishing officers and not enough on finding solutions that benefit everyone." Chief Hayes listened carefully to these concerns, recognizing that resistance often stemmed from fear of the unknown. In response, she doubled down on transparency, hosting regular updates to keep the public informed about the progress of the reforms. She also created opportunities for officers to share feedback anonymously, ensuring their voices were heard, without fear of retribution. Slowly but surely, Skepticism gave way to cautious optimism as tangible improvements began to emerge. Complaints against officers dropped significantly, and surveys showed a gradual increase in public trust toward the department. For Mr. Johnson, the journey was transformative. While the scars of his ordeal remained, they now served as reminders of the strength he discovered within himself. He became a symbol of hope for many, proof that even in the face of adversity, one could rise above hatred and fear. His evenings returned to their peaceful rhythm, though he now spent more time mentoring young people in the community, teaching them the value of perseverance and integrity. On one such evening, as he strolled through the same streets where he had been detained weeks earlier, he paused near the convenience store. The memory of that night lingered, but it no longer carried the sting of humiliation. Instead, it fueled his resolve to keep pushing forward, for himself, for his neighbors, and for generations to come. The ripple effects of Mr. Johnson's bravery and Chief Hayes's leadership reached farther than either could have imagined. Across the nation, similar stories of injustice began surfacing, prompting calls for accountability and reform in cities large and small. Advocacy groups cited the suburbs' efforts as a model for effective change, highlighting the power of collaboration between law enforcement and communities. What started as a single act of discrimination had blossomed into a movement, proving that even in the darkest moments light could shine through, if only people dared to let it. And for Mr. Johnson and Chief Hayes, the fight was far from over. They knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with obstacles, but they also knew they weren't walking it alone. Together they had sparked a flame, one that refused to be extinguished. Months after the incident that changed everything, life in the small suburban town began to settle into a new rhythm. The reforms introduced by Chief Margaret Hayes had taken root, and while they hadn't erased decades of mistrust overnight, they were slowly reshaping the relationship between the police department and the community. Officers now attended mandatory training sessions on cultural sensitivity and de-escalation techniques, learning how to approach situations with empathy rather than aggression. Citizen oversight committees reviewed complaints against officers, ensuring transparency and accountability. And perhaps most importantly, regular town hall meetings provided a platform for open dialogue where residents could voice their concerns directly to law enforcement leaders. For Mr. James Johnson, the transformation was profound. What had started as an unimaginable ordeal, being detained without cause and treated like a criminal, had turned into a catalyst for positive change. He became a beloved figure in the community, not just because of his resilience, but because of his unwavering commitment to justice. People often stopped him during his evening walks to thank him for speaking out and inspiring others to do the same. "You're making a difference, Mr. Johnson," one neighbor told him one evening, her voice filled with admiration. "We're lucky to have you here." Though he humbly brushed off the praise inside, Mr. Johnson felt a quiet pride. His pain had given rise to something meaningful, a movement toward a fairer, more inclusive society. One crisp autumn morning, the town gathered at the local park for a special ceremony honoring Mr. Johnson's contributions. Organized by community leaders and advocacy groups, the event drew hundreds of attendees, including families, students, and even representatives from neighboring towns. A large banner hung overhead reading, "Celebrating Courage, Honoring Mr. James Johnson." As Mr. Johnson walked onto the stage leaning on his cane, the crowd erupted into applause. Children waved handmade signs bearing messages like, "Thank you, Mr. Johnson," and "Justice for All," their bright colors reflecting the hope swelling in the air. Chief Hayes stood beside him, beaming with pride as she addressed the audience. "Today we celebrate not just one man, but what one man can achieve when he refuses to stay silent," she said, her voice ringing clear across the park. Mr. Johnson reminded us all that dignity and courage are powerful forces. Because of him, our department and our community is stronger, fairer, and more united than ever before. She then presented Mr. Johnson with a plaque inscribed, "With words of gratitude, officially declaring the day James Johnson Day in the town." Overwhelmed by emotion, Mr. Johnson accepted the award with trembling hands, his eyes glistening with tears. When it was his turn to speak, he paused for a moment, taking in the sea of smiling faces around him. "Thank you," he began, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "When I was detained that night, I felt powerless, humiliated, but today, standing here among all of you, I feel anything but powerless. This isn't my victory, it's ours. Together we've shown that injustice doesn't have to define us. Instead, it can inspire us to become better versions of ourselves." His words resonated deeply, drawing cheers and applause from the crowd. For many, his speech wasn't just a reflection of personal triumph. It was a call to action, urging everyone to continue striving for equality and understanding. The impact of Mr. Johnson's story extended far beyond the borders of the suburb. National news outlets picked up the tale, turning it into a symbol of hope and perseverance. Journalists interviewed him, Chief Hayes, and members of the community, highlighting the collaborative efforts that had led to real change. Advocacy. Organizations cited the town as a model for addressing systemic racism within law enforcement, pointing to its success as proof that reform was possible when leaders prioritized accountability and empathy. Even lawmakers took notice, proposing legislation aimed at implementing similar measures statewide. In response to the growing attention, Mr. Johnson and Chief Hayes embarked on a speaking tour, traveling to cities and towns across the country to share their experiences and insights. Their partnership was unique, an elderly black man and a white female police chief united by a shared vision of justice. At each stop, they emphasized the importance of collaboration, urging both law enforcement officials and community members to work together rather than against one another. "Change doesn't happen in isolation," Chief Hayes often said during these events. "It happens when we listen, learn, and act together." Their message struck a chord with audiences everywhere. In one city plagued by frequent clashes between police and residents, their visit sparked a wave of grassroots activism. Community members organized marches, workshops, and forums inspired by the reforms implemented back in Mr. Johnson's hometown. Officers in another town, initially resistant to change, found themselves moved by Mr. Johnson's humility and Chief Hayes' determination. "If they can do it there, why can't we do it here?" one officer remarked after hearing them speak. Slowly but surely, seeds of transformation were planted in communities far and wide. Back home, the ripple effects continued to unfold. Schools incorporated lessons about racial equity and civic responsibility into their curricula, using Mr. Johnson's story as a case study in resilience and advocacy. Students wrote essays, created art projects, and held debates exploring themes of justice and fairness. One high school senior named Maria even launched a mentorship program pairing students with local activists and leaders, including Mr. Johnson himself. "I want kids to know they don't have to wait until they're adults to make a difference," she explained. "Even small actions can lead to big changes." As winter approached, the town prepared for its annual holiday festival, a cherished tradition marked by twinkling lights, carolers, and hot cocoa stands. This year, however, the celebration carried an extra layer of significance. Organizers dedicated the event to unity and inclusivity, inviting diverse performers and hosting discussions about fostering harmony within the community. Mr. Johnson played a key role in planning the festivities, working closely with organizers to ensure the event reflected the values of equality and respect. On opening night, as snowflakes drifted gently from the sky, he stood alongside Chief Hayes under a canopy of sparkling lights, watching as people of all ages and backgrounds came together in joyous celebration. Despite the progress, challenges remained. Not everyone embraced the changes enthusiastically. Some older residents clung to outdated beliefs, grumbling about political correctness gone too far. Others argued that focusing so heavily on race diverted attention from other pressing issues. Yet even amidst these dissenting voices, there was a growing recognition that progress required patience and persistence. Chief Hayes remained vigilant, addressing concerns head-on while reinforcing the importance of staying the course. "Change is uncomfortable," she reminded her team during one meeting. "But discomfort is necessary if we want to grow. Let's keep moving forward, together." For Mr. Johnson, the journey was far from over. While the scars of his detention still lingered, they no longer defined him. Instead, they served as reminders of the strength he had discovered within himself and the power of collective action. He continued mentoring young people, sharing stories of his past struggles and triumphs to instill in them the importance of standing up for what is right. One evening, as he sat on his porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, his granddaughter, Emma, joined him, clutching a notebook filled with scribbled ideas. "Grandpa," she said shyly, "I want to write a book about you, about what happened and how you helped change things." Mr. Johnson smiled, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," he replied. "But remember, this isn't just my story. It's everyone's story. Every person who stood up, spoke out, or simply believed in a better future, they're part of it too." Emma nodded thoughtfully, her young mind already brimming with possibilities. As twilight settled over the neighborhood, casting long shadows across the quiet streets, Mr. Johnson felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges, but he knew he wouldn't face them alone. Together, he and his community had proven that even in the darkest moments, light could shine through, if only people dared to let it. And so, the legacy of Mr. Johnson and Chief Hayes lived on, not just in the policies they implemented or the speeches they gave, but in the hearts and minds of those they inspired. Their story served as a testament to the enduring power of courage, compassion, and collaboration. It reminded everyone that while injustice might cast a long shadow, it could never extinguish the flame of hope. For as long as there were people willing to stand up and speak out, the fight for justice would continue, and the world would be better for it.